Listeners be advised. The Soliloquy podcast discuss matters related to the human experience and many that are sexual in nature. Due to this, some conversations may surround triggering topics such as sexual violence, self-harm, abuse, and much more. Please be advised, a list of crisis and psychological resources will be available in the show notes of this episode. With that said, let's get started with the show.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention please as we go through the following safety instructions.
In the event that there is a loss of cabin pressure, oxygen mask will drop from the overhead. Place the mask over your nose and mouth. Breathe normally as oxygen is flowing even if the mask is not inflated. Be sure to adjust your own mask before helping others.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Soliloquy podcast, where we step out and speak on sexuality. This is your favorite host, Vernon T. Scott, also known as Slaytor Jackson, and for you freaky motherfuckers out there, Sebastian Adams. On today's episode, we are doing another mix and matchup. We are discussing rape culture as well as drunk sex, and I have the pleasure of being visited by, look, I told you it's a beautiful spirit last episode. She is a very beautiful spirit. You should already know that if you listen to the last episode. If this is your first episode, it's okay. It's okay. Welcome. You're coming in on a very rough conversation, but it's an educational conversation at the same time. Jennifer, how are you doing today?
I am doing really well today. I'm so glad to be here, Vernon.
Oh, we're happy to have you here with us. So, from the last episode, for those who have not listened to that yet, we know that you are a podcaster, award-winning author. Congrats, by the way.
Thank you. Big deal there for sure. Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
also are a coach, correct?
I wouldn't necessarily use the word coach. I personally use the word mentor and healer. And I basically, as well as I'm a master trainer for EFT International. So coach feels, I don't know, like it just doesn't quite feel like what I do.
Mm-hmm.
Bottom line, I show up and I share my experience, strength, and hope, and I also hold space for people to find their truth.
Yes. So,
Yeah.
what you're saying is that you change people's lives?
Yeah, you could say that. Or I help people to change their own lives.
Mm-hmm.
And, because I really believe that all we ultimately, any of us can do is maybe like wipe the window so somebody can see through it and be able to see what's going on and offer perspective to somebody. But I think, it's like we don't heal other people. We facilitate healing to happen within us, and I think to allow powers greater than ourselves to, let the magic happen.
Yes, and I
Yeah.
think like that's something that I've been trying to help other people understand. Like when someone comes to me, they want advice on something, they just say, "What should I do?" And I'm like, I cannot really tell you what you should do because that is a choice that you have to make. I could provide you with multiple different options. Some things that I've seen personally where somebody who made this decision or that decision, what it led for them. But at the end of the day, the choice has to be your own. And when
It,
you do make that choice, own that decision and see where it takes you. If you end up being disappointed, that's okay. What did you learn from that disappointment? And how can you move to go further from that? Like, own your own narrative. Do not allow other people to move you from place to place, essentially.
well, and the whole idea of what should I do? It's like I know from my own experience, the best advice, it will fall on deaf ears until you're ready to hear it.
Mm,
And it's sort of like I could say to somebody, I'll sometimes if somebody really is like looking for guidance, I might say something like, well, if it was me, this is probably what I would do. But I really do think that like bottom line, we have to be ready for whatever it is that we have to be ready. And if we're not ready, know him, even the most sage wisdom from the wisest person. Like God could, come down from on high and be like, Vernon, you must do this now. We're not going to listen. We're just
Mm,
not going to listen. I do find sometimes when it comes to decision making, though, that sometimes the best thing we can do is like have somebody offer a piece of a suggestion, or even think about a decision for ourselves, and then sit with how does it feel? Does it land in my body, or do I get an immediate like, yeah, no, not for me? Because a lot of times, even like hearing the feedback and recognizing this is not the answer that's right for me can be a really powerful way to find out what makes sense.
exactly.
Yeah.
Whew. All right, you all. It's time to get into this conversation. And whenever there's a conversation related to drunk sex or just sex while intoxicated, I do like to leave this one message with everybody that when it does come to drunk sex, intoxicated sex, consent, it goes out the door as soon as someone indulges in some kind of intoxicant. And when it comes to that, always be cognizant that their yes is not, it may not actually be their no, their true yes, because they are intoxicated. Now, that does not mean that people are not given that chance for personal autonomy, because personal autonomy is always a thing. And there are those people who do enjoy having sex while intoxicated. But if that is your preference, if that's who you are and that is something that you do, I always recommend doing that with someone that you trust, and not to just engage in that kind of behavior with someone that you just do not know. So
Hmm.
just keep that in mind, back of your heads, people, if you are somebody who does look into those kind of activities. Now, on with that being said, the first thing I wanted to talk about is essentially how we are socialized, or how we objectify sex workers within our society. How yes, we can appreciate the things that they do in terms of our own pleasure, and we still stigmatize everything that they do, but we also, rather than seeing sex workers as being fully human, being people who are professionals, people who are trying to just do a job and do a job well, provide a service, because what they do is a service, we just look at them as an object, that they're a source of our pleasure only, and not a full human being. So, what is your sentiment about surrounding that?
Everything you're saying, I'm like, yes, yes, yes. And I mean, I think that in many ways, considering that the sex industry has been primarily female for a very long period of time, the idea that a woman is an object, or the idea that, I mean, it's only been, I mean, this is a larger conversation than just sex work. This is a conversation about the fact that married women couldn't own their own credit card in the 1970s. That women, it has only been literally like what, 102 years that we as women in the United States have had the right to vote. That there are all of these, there are still archaic laws that make a woman a piece of property.
Hmm,
And it is not, we are not that far away from the idea of women being chattel, but also like away from the idea of like, rape within marriage wasn't even considered rape, because a woman was supposed to just do, like it was her responsibility and it was her obligation to satisfy and meet the needs of her husband. So I guess from my perspective, of course, a sex worker is going to be regarded as the fulfillment of somebody else's desires and interests and needs, and not necessarily be regarded as autonomous and her own or his own or their own being,
hmm,
simply because we live in a culture where misogyny, and the idea of, especially I think heterosexual cisgendered white men, really do kind of like have been culture, like groomed and assimilated into a culture that has basically told them that everything revolves around them and it's all about them all the time.
hmm,
And I mean, I just think as more and more sex workers start empowering themselves to claim this as a profession that they're proud of, that they are, and deserving of rights and deserving of respect and all of these things, and legalizing prostitution and legalizing, and making it so that sex work can be something that people have assurances within. I mean, yes, 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 yes. Let's make this happen across the board.
And this is, of course, my own personal belief, not really rooted in facts, I guess. But I truly believe that one of the reasons why prostitution and all forms of sex work is not legalized throughout the U.S. is because it's a protected privilege for the heterosexual white man. Because I have that privilege of paying for the vagina, the ass, the dick, or whatever it is that I want from a person. I have that privilege of affording that. So because I have those finances and I want to not allow other individuals to have this same privilege, then I want to make sure that this is demonized. I want there to be a stigma against this. I want it to be criminal, like drug usage. Cocaine, because it was a high dollar drug, that though it was illegal to sell or whatever, but it's not illegal to have and
Mm.
partake in whenever you're at a elitist party or anything like that. Like, what was it, something studio something, where they just did,
Studio 54?
there we go, where
Yeah.
they just did coke on a regular basis,
Yeah,
yet
constant.
yet crack is, which is a derivative of coke, is like demonized. It's like it's a crime to have. If you're caught snorting it, you should go to jail and all these things. So that's those trends is the thing that makes me believe that's the reason why prostitution and sex work is not going to be legal. Well, I hope it is going to be legal, but why it's not legal today?
Well, I also think that you've got privilege, and you've got protecting privilege, you've got aspects of protecting sort of the facade or the idea of like respectability that is tied into, cisgendered white male privilege and wealth. And then you've also got, the whole sort of like fetishizing of sin, that and sort of like the whole Christian idea of sex is bad, Madonna whore thing. And yet, some of the freakiest, kinkiest people out there are the evangelicals.
The Soliloquy podcast focuses on the variability of sexual expression. When it comes to sexual expression, we often depend on pornography to illustrate how one must perform sexually. For those who have not learned this by now, the stuff you see in porn is not real. Pornography provides a singular perspective of sexual expression that is not often the reality we see during our own sexual encounters. The Soliloquy podcast is a conversation that takes you outside of the compressed box of what many know about sex. Some of the topics we discuss includes kinks, condom usage, status disclosure, and past sexual experiences. The Soliloquy podcast steps out on sexual norms and recognizes that the norm is not the only normal. Subscribe today and join the conversation.
Some of the freakiest, kinkiest people out there are the evangelicals. There's a new movie that just recently came out that's on Hulu right now that I've not yet watched, that I just have to get the spoons to get it up to watch it, called God Forbid, that is basically a documentary about Jerry Falwell Jr. and the sex scandal that basically caused him, like undid him, where he was like, his wife had, they apparently like had a thing going where his wife had hooked up with this young, very attractive man, and they were giving him a lot of privileges and a lot of opportunities and a lot of stuff, but Falwell was like videotaping his wife and this guy. And I mean, we're talking like major kink here, we're talking like major, dubious behavior, and yet he's a pillar of society, and there's so I think the other part of it is that there's the protecting of the privilege, but there's also the protecting of the forbidden fruit, and the fact that, if sex is legalized and there isn't necessarily this veil of secrecy over prostitution, then is it as tasty? Is it as fun? Is it as, but also, are you going like it goes against this idea of like the compartmentalizing of the self,
Hmm.
and that you get these people who are like, they're like the church going insurance salesman, who, can do no wrong. And then it's sort of like they die and you discover their massive collection of porn and their credit card receipts for all of this stuff. And it's kind of this idea of like the secret lives that these people are living. And I do think that I cannot speak to other cultures, in that I was raised in lily white America, but I do think that within white, cisgendered white privileged male culture, there is a lot of compartmentalizing that goes on.
Mm.
And within that compartmentalizing, I think that there is a certain amount of like secret lives. And so I wonder if another part of why the idea of legalizing prostitution doesn't get a lot of traction is because that would legitimize something that people want to keep secret. Because if it was legitimized and brought out into the open, then all of a sudden, these things that they've been able to keep like on the DL is no longer there.
Oh, that's an amazing point. Like, I really I agree. I think that is part of it too, because like you said, if this no longer if this secret becomes something that's popular, something that's out there, will it still be as tasty?
Right.
And when you said the kink of sin, I was like, that's it, that's it. Like, I really do believe that people do. I think it's a little bit of like the exhibitionist and that
Hmm.
some people may have within them, that it's the fear of I might get caught doing something that's taboo, that is making them want to pursue people, making them want to pay for, the sex, or indulge in those sexual acts that are, like you said, forbidden, the forbidden fruit. But I really do hope that we get to a point where people realize that you can still have that same level of, I guess, sexual intoxication that you get from that, those feelings of getting away with something by, just setting up something like, hey, I find you attractive. I want us to meet in an undisclosed location. I want you to engage in sex with me, and I just want us to act as though we do not know each other. Like,
Hmm.
create a identity, create a persona, and that's another layer of compartmentalizing, but it's more playful at the same time too.
Well, and it's consensual,
Mm.
and as we're talking, I'm actually really thinking we as a culture, and we talked about being groomed, in the previous episode, we talked about being groomed, but we as a culture, I think, a lot of times, like there is a certain kind of energy that when we get triggered and when our trauma response is activated, that really activates the fight or flight mechanism within us, that activates a certain amount of like just emotional anxiousness. And I think that there are many of us who have not necessarily ever experienced what it means to be fully present, to be fully embodied, to be really in, like to really be like in just full autonomy and power and sovereignty and consent. And in many ways, like even the whole thing of like attraction, talking about the bad boys and being groomed to be attracted to bad boys, I think that there are many of us who mistake being triggered and traumatized and activated in our fear for being sexually aroused.
Mm.
And if you think about the fact that there's now proof that we inherit the trauma of our ancestors. And now there's more information that not only are you is your DNA, like is your genetic, like you are not just a cell in the body of your mother before you are born. You are a cell in your grandmother's body before you are born, because as you are forming, or as your mother is forming her ovaries inside of your grandmother's body, you are an egg inside of your mother's body inside of your grandmother. So there is this way in which we are not just dealing with our own stuff, but we are all basically carrying the legacies of misogyny that go back for generation upon generation down the matrilineal lines, that we are all bringing forward. And there's this really fascinating stuff I've been reading lately about attachment theory, but also about nervous system regulation. When a baby, like when we're in utero, our nervous system is completely dependent on our mother's nervous system. Like we do not have the ability to self-regulate at all. We're flooded by our mother's stress hormones. We're flooded by our mother's emotions. And then when we're born, it's like the first 2, 3 years of our life, but especially the first 2 years of our life, we co-regulate our nervous system with our mothers. If we have a mother who's anxious and high strung, then we never learn what it feels like to be calm and relaxed and grounded. We basically imprint on anxious, dysregulated, and distressed. But if we start thinking about it, it's like we've got these lines of like cooking inside of these anxious bodies, and we just pass it from one generation to the next, to the next, to the next. And so what this just really makes me talk about or wonder as we're talking is like how many of us are really just have been so utterly programmed to perceive danger and excitement as sexual arousal when it's not necessarily that. And yet we are so programmed, like that idea of the forbidden fruit, because it's like it's itchy. I mean, there's back in the day, hopefully it is you guys, I don't know if you've ever heard of Spanish fly,
Hmm.
but like, yeah, I remember hearing about it when I was a kid because my mom was working in like sex education and everything. And it just was such a horrible thing because it basically is like it causes the nervous system to get really, really overexcited and makes you just feel like super, super itchy to the point where you would do anything to not feel that way. And so for a lot of women, it would get them so itchy that they would just be like, sure, I'll have sex to try to get rid of this feeling. But that is not pleasure. And yet we interpret it so much as, I think we interpret so much agitation, irritation, and distress as pleasure because it is so pervasive in our culture.
And one of the thing that came to mind was like how we are socialized to connect pain and pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things that I'm trying, in some of the other work that I'm doing is to disassociate those things because even when it comes to the loss of the virginity, we're told, oh, it's supposed to hurt. And then you learn, well, I learned over the years that, oh, it's not really supposed to hurt. It's when it comes to heterosexual sexual encounters, it should be minor discomfort, but it's not supposed to hurt. There's a difference between those two. And even outside of that, I think of that phrase when it comes to queer sex, where it's because I was against pain, even when it came to me losing my virginity. I was like, I don't want anything to hurt. I want someone who's going to be gentle, who's going to be take things slow. But I remember hearing those phrases, "Oh, it hurts so good," and I'm like, that doesn't sound healthy to me. That doesn't sound like anything that I want. That doesn't sound like the sexual encounters that I want to engage in. And even when I look at some pornography, I see how aggressive someone may be and how um, when they're extremely aggressive, pounding it out or whatever, and they're trying to run away or something like that, they make it seem as though it's sexy to pull somebody back while they're trying to run away, or that idea of fucking someone and they're wanting to escape is a good thing. And it's
Right.
not. It's that person might actually be in pain. Like
Yeah.
you have to acknowledge that they are in pain and there's something that you, the person, are doing to put them in pain.
Well, and you remind me of I was like in my, like I was 20 and I had this lover who at one point, he had grabbed me by the hips, and he had done this thing where he had kind of like put his fingers, like he had his hands in me and he had kind of like put his fingers in on either side of my hip bones and had like kind of really stuck them in there. And I was like, ow, like that really hurts. That's not comfortable. And I will never forget his response. He went, "No, it doesn't. That's supposed to be sexy. That's a turn on." And I was like, "Dude, I am telling you, this is physically uncomfortable and you're hurting me right now." But he was so socialized to believe that what he was doing was supposed to be a turn on, that he could not receive or hear the feedback I was giving him as a living, breathing human being, saying, "This is not comfortable to me."
Hmm.
And instead was going with the fantasy of what he thought, probably based on porn, that made him think that, that like even my feedback was just completely overridden with this idea of, no, this is supposed to be pleasurable. And I mean, I have a number of friends who are really on the kinky spectrum, really, into BDSM and other kinds of things where they really do get off on pain and where it is a transcendent experience for them, but it is a consensual experience for them. And in many ways, I've had a number of conversations with people about what it means to really own that part of oneself and recognize like what is the thing that works for you. And I can also say that there's a really big difference between being like sort of starting cold and being really aroused and experiencing certain things, like something that could be, I mean, like you said, even with sex, where if you are warmed up, something can be really pleasurable and it might have an edge of intensity to it that if you were not warmed up, it would be painful. But once you are warmed up, it's just intensity, but it's still like, skyrockets at night,
Hmm.
or, or in the or in the afternoon. But now I'm thinking of Anchorman, but that's a whole other thing. A very specific reference. If you are not an Anchorman fan, you guys are probably like, what the hell is she talking about? But
I
there's a
know what you're
very,
talking
very,
about.
you do know what I'm talking about?
I've seen that one.
Okay. Yeah. My favorite part is the kittens. But
Uh,
but yeah, so I do think, and I also will say that in my experience there's an incredible spectrum between, around, to quote the Divinals, there's a fine line between pleasure and pain.
mm,
That I think that there is an incredible spectrum, and some of us also are just way more sensitive than other people are. And so what might not really phase one person can absolutely phase another person.
mhm.
Yeah.
Amen to that. Like even like with nipple play, I tell my sexual partners often, I have sensitive nipples. Like you cannot bite those. Like nibbling, okay, that's fine. But if you like yours bitten on, like I have vampire teeth, cool, that's great. I can do that for you. But do not expect that's going to work on me because we all have different pleasure thresholds, pain thresholds, and look, some sensitive areas you just cannot do those things, regardless of how
No.
built up it is.
Well, and age wise, it makes a really big difference too,
Mm,
because your hormones will change things. And like when I was younger, I had way higher tolerance to any kind of nipple attention than I do now. But I actually have to say, I went through a period where, I spent 20 years as a tattooer before I shifted to like entirely doing my work only as a healer, because I'd been doing tattooing as a healing art for many years. But needless to say, I was in the body mod world. And so at one point, I decided to get my nipples pierced because I thought they would be really pleasing and really lovely. But gotta say, not like for me, it was like it just added a level of sensitivity that completely took the fun out of any kind of anything when it came to my nipples. And so I went from being somebody who was, fairly like, I don't know, like it was just sort of like something on the menu to, yeah, this is off the menu now. So I think that it can even within our own bodies, age, time, differences, things can make a difference on what works for you and what doesn't work for you.
I agree.
Yeah.
Another thing that we talked about in the intake meeting is I want to combine these two things.
Yeah.
The first one is what rape looks like, because we have a certain look of what rape is supposed to be, but rape is not always that.
Mm-mm.
And then the other thing is the concept that rape is not about sex, it's all about power.
Yes.
So what are some of the things that, well, not what you want to talk about, but what is your sentiments on those two things?
Well, again, you and I are exactly, or I believe we're on the same page about
Mhm,
these
mhm,
things. So first off, let's just talk about what I was taught or what I believe, like my perception of rape as a child and as a young girl, because as a girl, you're sort of groomed to be aware of predators. Don't take candy from strangers. Don't get into a strange car, like, so first off, the idea is that rape is going to happen with somebody you don't know.
mhm,
Secondly, that rape is violent, that it is, and that there is that your life is threatened, that and that it is sort of like this back alley on the streets, or somebody breaks into your home or something, but that it is like a violent act that is done to you by somebody you don't know, and that it is forced injury, and that there's injury that comes from it, and that you're going to experience like these devastating emotional scars from the experience. And I think the thing is that when we define rape by this very, very limited category, there are so many gray areas, where our consent is revoked, or where we never gave our consent in the first place, where it is a power play, where it is a power struggle, where it is not something we have agreed to. Now, I would say that I think rape has a spectrum in terms of, in the same way that you could have on a scale of 0 to 10, like 0 being absolutely no pain whatsoever and 10 being the worst thing you've ever experienced or dead, that rape does have a spectrum of like, of degrees of horribleness to it.
mhm,
And that, and that I think that one of the reasons why a lot of times the date rapes or the sort of casual hookup that just kind of goes over the edge, or as you were talking about, the non-consensual sex because somebody's intoxicated, that a lot of times I think we dismiss that as being like, I don't know, kind of a stupid behavior, or, boys will be boys, or, oh, we were just not really thinking, but we don't necessarily regard it as rape.
mhm,
And I think you and I talked about this, and I did write about it in the book. So this is not the first time I've spoken about this, but I had an encounter, when I was in art school, where I made some really dumb choices that were basically did not have forethought, because I was like 20 and I was just not thinking because I was 20. And I ended up at a party. And so I was fairly drunk, and I ended up at a party, and I had not, I didn't, and I missed the last train out of the area. I was too broke to get a cab, and I was too proud to call my parents and say, "Hey, will you please come, like, drive 40 minutes south to come pick me up from a party?" And so I ended up in a situation where I hooked up with one of the people, one of the guys who lived in the apartment. And I was in a position where we were messing around. It was consensual. And then there got to be a point where he wanted to take it further. And I said, no, I'm not comfortable with that. And he kept on pushing. And I was a bit drunk, but I was sober enough that I knew what was going on. But I also was aware that I was between a rock and a hard place. I couldn't necessarily easily just put my clothes on. Like, they didn't live in a great neighborhood. If I left the party, I was going to end up sort of in a worse, less safe place than I was. And so there just came a point where he kept pushing. He kept on sort of knocking on the door, as it were. And I finally just let him in. I was like, you know what? This is the lesser of evils. And it wasn't until I had a conversation with other women a couple days after the party who were all sort of part of this community of people, where one of the women looked at me and said, Jennifer, that he raped you. And I was like, really? Like, I didn't even register that that was what had happened because I did see my own agency in it. And the thing is, what I will say is that I really do see how I set myself up for this situation. Like, it was not like I was walking down an alley and somebody, hijacked me. It wasn't like I was, it wasn't even like I was in a dorm room and I was drunk and suddenly I have this like person on me. It was a lot more subtle than that. Like, there was a lot of gray area. And yet I said no, and he kept pushing. And on the very, very bottom line, honest, like for me, and like I said in the previous one, there's no such thing as trauma Olympics. So, that there's no such thing as trauma Olympics. And yet, I would say for me, in terms of on a scale of 0 to 10, I would say I would probably give this particular infraction like a 4 or a 5, not like a 9 or a 10, just because I did the mental calculations for myself. I had put myself in a situation that was really awkward. I had gotten myself into a situation and where I kind of was like doing the math, and the sort of the least amount of harm was basically going to be coming from acquiescing and having essentially coerced sex.
Mm, I hate that happened. But also, thank you for sharing that story too, because many people do not recognize how coercion is rape, or
Yeah.
how when you are in a position where you are between a rock and a hard place, is you have to make a decision. Like, what is the best outcome for me? Is it to be here where I know what the danger is, or where I know what is going to happen? Or do I want to expose myself to pretty much being out in the cold, alone, in a strange place, and I have no idea where I'm going to go?
I mean, it
Um,
was it was the neighborhood that they were in was like right on the edge of a really sketchy neighborhood in the inner city of Boston, and it was like 2 o'clock. It was something around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm this like little like twink of a white girl, and just like really not in like it was the risk of my level of risk was lower in terms of my bodily harm
mhm,
staying there. And basically, there was an old saying that, back in the days in the 70s with hitchhiking, that used to be people would have literally had the bumper sticker that said gas, grass, or ass. And it was kind of like, you either contribute money to my gasoline,
mhm.
you contribute weed to, get me, like let's, light up and, as we drive, or you're gonna give me sex for a ride, like gas, grass, or ass. And I think in some ways I kind of looked at this one and I was like, you know what? I've got to decide. Like, I don't have the money for the gas. I don't have the grass. I do have the ass. This is what
Mhm.
I'm gonna, this is the currency that I can use to have a safe place to lay my head for the rest of the night and then get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and hop on the first subway to get home.
Yeah. And like mentally, well, I definitely understand the decision behind it.
Yeah.
I 100% understand that, because some people are in those situations, and some people are in those situations within their own marriages,
Yes.
and
Well, in the
that's
choice between do you acquiesce to sex or do you potentially get beaten, you know?
exactly. And that's a conversation that, or even a reality, some people are not willing to acknowledge. Because, like, even when I was doing, like, not necessarily workshops, but programs with the colleges that I worked at, related to sexual assault and talking about consent, I will always bring up that conversation about, okay, do you have ownership over your spouse? And how there will be a lot of younger people who just like, of course, it's that's my pussy. if I want the sex, the pussy is supposed to be there for me to have the sex. But I'm like, but that pussy's attached to a whole person, and that
Right.
whole person has a choice within that relationship, and how and breaking down the belief system that these kids have been socialized to believe in, that is within the hegemony of our society, that you have that ownership of your spouse, that whatever they do cannot be done without your permission, and just tying how that belief system in itself is rooted within the rape culture of this society.
Well, and for women, and especially as women start to age and your libido starts to shift, and like there is a point where, I mean, there's a whole kind of cultural meme, and sadly, like where it's like, how many times have we seen the story of the man who becomes bored with his wife and leaves her for a younger, more attractive model?
Mm,
Like, and I will say that I am incredibly grateful to be married to who I'm married to. I have a really wonderful spouse and a really wonderful partnership. And I do not get pressure from him to have sex when I am not in the mood, when, like when it's like my body is just like not there. But I get pressure from myself
mm,
to feel like, oh my God, if I say no, like how many no's do I get before he gets bored? How many times am I going to be able to say, I'm just not that into it right now, or I'm not that interested in this, before my security, my sense of self, my commodity as a female becomes kind of like I lose my value.
mm,
And I think I really do. If we broaden the idea of rape culture, but also sex as like currency in marriage, how many women continuously acquiesce, especially women when they're starting to, and I will say everybody's mileage varies. Everybody's mileage varies. But I do know from conversations with a number of women that for many of us, menopause really impacts our libido. And what once was a turn on is no longer necessarily such a turn on. And I really do wonder sometimes, like, how often, because our culture is saying, this is a necessary thing, like it's expected, like even the idea that like you could argue for divorce because somebody is depriving you of sex,
mm. Right.
you know. And so how often is as the partner who is maybe the one with the lower libido, how often does that partner find themselves in a place where they imagine or feel obliged
Hmm.
to accommodate or to do things that they may or may not really want to do themselves, because of what our culture, because of all of these ideas of like what is good.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's just a reminder of how unfair and how unbalanced our culture is, most definitely when it comes to interpartner relationships. It's like whenever you have the concept of, someone being at home, the stay-at-home parent, and how the other person's the breadwinner, and because they are considered the breadwinner of the household, they supposedly have more power. And it's like we don't teach we don't teach that there should be mutual respect within these relationships. That just because this person is at home raising a family or whatever the case is, even if there's no family, that does not mean that they're less valuable. Just because this person is the one who's working all the time does not mean that they have more value. Because in the true partnership, in the true relationship where there is give and take, where you're pouring in and receiving at a equal, if not sometimes unbalanced way, that there's some reciprocity within that relationship. But if something were to happen, the other partner can step up. The other partner can really do what needs to be done to in order for the family to sustain itself. It's like there's still value in that person who's at home, just as much value for that person who's out here in the streets working.
Right, right. You just made me think of something which, we were talking, and I think it's was in the previous episode where we were talking about legalization of prostitution.
Mhm.
And, and some of the theories of why is it not legal everywhere. And one of the things that I just realized is, the other part of it is the financial side of it. If prostitution is legalized, that empowers the people, and especially mostly women, or, I'd say, I don't know the percentages of how many, like proportionately, how many more female prostitutes are there to female sex workers to male sex workers. I don't know,
Mhm.
but I would be willing to bet you it's probably more primarily female.
Mhm.
And if you bring in legalization, what you're also bringing in is financial autonomy. And financial autonomy and rape culture are like that, in the sense that so many women become financially dependent. And the thing is, as I was saying before, it's like it wasn't until the late 70s that a woman could have a credit card of her own with her own name and not her husband's name on it, that women could own, that women can own property. Like if you watching Downton Abbey, that series, one of the things that's fascinating about it is that the archaic rules of ownership, land ownership, we're talking like, in the 1920s in England, you had to have a male heir to pass property onto. Females could not receive or inherit property. And so if you start looking at this, like, we're talking like 100 years ago, less than 100 years, like we're talking what, 50 years ago with the 1970s, women have been financially like, uh, cut off at the knees with their finances. And the males are so frequently, the male is the breadwinner, the male is the property owner, everything is in his name. And one of the only kinds of currency that a lot of women have is sexuality.
Mm. Whew, Lordy, it's because when you mentioned how rape culture is linked to financial autonomy, that triggered a thought of how you cannot, like, rape culture exists because of oppression. Rape culture exists because of stripping autonomy at any chance that we can, and normalizing the oppression in any way possible, be it through racism, financial means, or even sexism, anything that contributes to the oppression of another individual and the stripping of their autonomy is still rooted within that. Because once you have control over somebody's autonomy, you have power over them because they cannot make the decision for themselves. And it's all
Well,
rape
and
culture.
and and I'm part of a really interesting, extremely radical prayer community that actually we pray the rosary, and so we go through the mysteries on a regular basis. And for anybody who's not familiar with them, because the mysteries, there's like the joyful mysteries, which is all about sort of like the Mary's experience as a young woman and the birth of Jesus and his childhood. And then there's what are called the sorrowful mysteries, which are just like the passion of the Christ. And then there's like the glorious mysteries, which are about the resurrection and then Mary's ascension into heaven as the queen of heaven and earth. But there's this one mystery that nobody ever wants to choose to talk about or to like lead. And that is the second mystery in the sorrowful mysteries, the scourging at the pillar. And interestingly, this is the mystery where Jesus is like, stripped and flayed and beaten within an inch of his life. And some people say he was actually, it was raped, like that this is something that happened. And, this is something that you can look into this kind of scourging and this kind of like, there was a, within slave culture, I've got my friend Michael has talked about this, where, it was like, there was this thing I think called buck breaking, but
Mhm.
where, it's like the public display of rape as a way to put people in their place, but also as a cautionary tale to show what will happen if you defy the empire, if you defy the culture. And in a way, it's like it's not only about taking away another individual's autonomy, but it's also this entire cultural idea of, if you get uppity, if you act out, if you do these things, if you break the rules, then we're going to put your head on a spike. Like
Mhm.
that there is something about about it that is not just about keeping a person or oppressing an individual. It's about oppressing entire populations,
Hmm.
and basically maintaining power, ironically, for at this point in time a minority on this planet.
Yes, exactly. Ooh, you shaking tables today.
Hmm.
You are shaking some tables, and I agree with you
And I thank
100%.
my mama for that, because she was the one who gave me, my mother was a she's still alive, but no longer, at this point retired, and very sweet, fairly demented little old lady. But when I was a child, she was a sex educator, and she was also like active in League of Women Voters, and very, she very, very active. Like, she was working, getting women out of state, getting women to find abortions pre Roe versus Wade, and doing amazing things. By the time I was 18, my very first political t-shirt was a narrow t-shirt that my mom got for me right after I had registered to vote, and said, "I'm pro-choice and I vote." And I'm just incredibly grateful to have been raised by a very feminist, very politically aware mother.
Oh, I love that for you. I
Yeah.
definitely love that for you. And
Hmm.
I will have to say, like, even when it comes to like for myself, I definitely appreciate not only just my mother, but my aunts too, because they were very outspoken, and because of how outspoken they are, that you know, pretty much became embedded in me. And I think that's another reason why I cannot keep a job, because I talk too much. Uh, but I will always fight for myself and fight for the person who doesn't have a voice in the room,
Yeah.
because it's just one of those things that I've been raised to believe, that you should always stick up for those people who can't stick up for themselves, that you should voice your opinions, even though someone does not want to hear it, but it is still important because
Right.
these things matter.
Yeah.
So love it. And if you are one of those people who need that validation or that encouragement, speak up. Let people know how you feel and voice your opinion, because your opinion is important. Now, before we get into the Never Have I Ever segment, there was that one thing from the last episode that I said we were going to talk about in this episode, which is how we have been, in terms of a culture, socialized to enable violence against women. And I see this very often
Mm.
in the TV shows that we watch, where it's like either, actually, let's go off of my research in general. How rape culture and legal practices are so very linked. How we blame the victim, which is also often a woman, in terms of rape. But whenever we have a court case, we always demonize the person who is the true victim in the situation, tarnish their name, and do all these things. And that's normal to us. It's
Hmm.
expected that this is going to happen. Whenever there's a woman who's violated, we talk about her history, how she was such a whore, and how she did this, that, and the third. She had sex with this person. Everybody knew that she was fucking around and all these other things. But at the end of the day, this person was the victim. Why are we
Right.
shaming this person? Why are we trying to make her into the stigma or the taboo topic in the room so we don't discuss it? This person was harmed. Go after the person who harmed this person.
Well, and even the idea that, like, if somebody has sex with one person, and this is, I mean, we could go down an entire rabbit hole about the whole concept of incels,
Mhm.
and, and like the idea of, because she's pretty and attractive and she was interested in that one person, therefore that means that I'm entitled to have sex with her as well. Like, the idea that if a woman is sexually active, or anybody is really sexually active and is really, like, enjoys sex, that somehow that just means that anybody's entitled to have sex with them. I mean, what the fuck, people? Like, this is not like, ugh.
It enrages you. I get it.
Yeah, it is just it. Well, and I was thinking, as we were talking about, being culture, socialized towards it, and I talked a lot about movie references in our last interview or last podcast episode, and like another example, like the movie, the Farrelly Brothers movie, Something About Mary.
Mhm.
Like if that movie is absolutely repugnant. It is a movie about a whole bunch of different men who are obsessed with this one woman, Mary, and all of them are stalking her. Every one of them is stalking her. And yet, and it is a funny movie. Like I think the Farrelly brothers are very, very funny directors and producers and make great movies. But this movie in particular is like, it's so sad that we live in a culture that thinks that's funny. Like,
When you said that, I immediately started to think about the movie Porky's, which when I was young, I loved it because it was hilarious and all that. But, thinking about, I could have rewatched that as an adult after I've done all my research. I know the problems of it the last time I saw it when I was like 15. I was like, okay, this is quite problematic, but I'm still enjoying it. But, 15, dumb. Anyways,
mm-hmm,
but it was very problematic to even think about like that scene where they found the hole to look at these young ladies while they were showering.
yeah,
And we're not having a conversation how that's inappropriate, but that was
mm-hmm,
expected of
right.
guys to do something like that. Even when he put his penis in that hole and the women on the other side, that's so funny, ha 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 ha. That is not really rooted in reality because I
No,
don't
that is not rooted in reality.
like, I don't know any woman or any person who actually has sex out here would appreciate a random dick coming out of nowhere if they're not at a glory hole and expecting one to pop out.
Right, right, right. Well, and it sort of makes me wonder how many of the people, the generation of men who are sending dick pics now watched Porky's as little kids and actually think that I mean, basically a dick pic is a digital Porky's,
Oh
or
my
a
God,
digital
yes.
glory hole. Yeah.
Yes.
But it's like, dude, yeah, no, no woman is ever going to be impressed when you randomly send her your dick pic. No, just doesn't
No,
work that way.
it does not work that way. Like,
Does
even
not work that way.
like for myself, like, yeah, if I see a cute dick, it's just like, okay, that's actually cute. And
Right.
most definitely has some good flair, good design. You did something, you put some artwork into this. I like your artistry. But at the same time, you could have asked. Like, you could have just been
You
like,
could
hey,
have asked. You could have asked. There's a
like, do
big
you
difference. Yeah.
like do you want to see an artistic dick pic? You know what? Yes, I do, because I don't get enough of that. Like, might as well.
I had this friend a number of years ago who had gotten her husband. They're a really, really wonderful, amazingly sexually progressive, polyamorous, like we're kinky, amazing couple, just amazing people. But anyway, they found this like amazing like picture book that has glory hole, like it's pictures. It's so funny. It's like a kid's book, but with like a hole for your dick. And like it's like you hold up the book and like stick your penis through it. And then you can like and so it's sort of like so like one of them is like a cowboy riding, and like one of them is like like a merman riding, so it's just hysterically funny. That is an example of artistic dick pics that are also consensual, and where it's like and yes, I know about this because I consented to seeing a picture, which was hysterically funny and really, really amusing. But if it's not consensual, then it doesn't matter how attractive it is. It wasn't agreed upon.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And just to add a nugget on these dick pics for people, just because you send a dick pic does not mean that the other person is required to send anything to you. Because always remember that dick pic was not invited.
Right,
And
right.
another thing that wish we don't have the time to talk about it,
Mhm.
but that transactional actions, most definitely when it comes to like sex is rooted in rape culture. Like, oh, because the tick for tack thing, like because I did this, you're expected to do that. That's rooted in that. That's taking away the expectation of consent that you're not asking for it. Now, if you do agree upon, hey, if I send you a dick pic, are you willing to send something back to me? And they're just like, yes, then okay, that's more consensual. Now, if they don't do it, then that's just on them. That might be a flag that this probably might not be the person that you need to trust with your body if they're not willing to, follow through on any kind of agreement that you both mutually agreed upon. But let's bring this kind of conversation up. People talk to
Hmm.
people, ask them, are they okay with having a dick pic? It's not sexy.
Well, and I think that, talking about like we've been sort of having this conversation through this entire episode about transaction of sex as commodity and
Hmm.
or a currency and transactional stuff. And like even the idea of like you go on a date and somebody takes you out to a really fancy restaurant and what is expected of you.
Hmm.
And really, all that should be expected of you is like the opportunity to get to know you and your scintillating company, and like the pleasure of somebody just sharing time with you, and that it should be a gift freely given. But I think unfortunately, we live in a culture where there are a lot of people who will start wondering, like, oh my God, he just spent $300 on a really fancy meal for me and brought me a
Hmm.
bouquet of flowers. What do I now owe him?
Exactly.
And I mean, it's a big one.
And like that's part of the reason why for first dates, I always just say we're going to split it even before we even go out. Like I pay for my stuff, you pay for your stuff because I don't want the person I'm with to feel obligated that they need to have sex because I pay for everything. I'm trying to get to know you. Pay for your own stuff. I would like to see how you spend your money too. That way, if I do want to pay for a full date all by myself, I know I can budget how much I'm going to spend.
I did not start like letting men pay for me, and being raised by a feminist. And I was raised in a time where Dutch treat was something. Who knows where that's probably some massive racist comment of Dutch treat. But I remember like I grew up like sharing the money. I always pulled my wallet out. I never, ever, ever expected somebody to pay for me. And I had a lot of autonomy as a result of that. And it wasn't until I was in my 30s when I started to be like, okay, I'll let this guy pay for a meal and sort of watch what was happening with it. And that was something that was just really telling, was like, is somebody going to be gracious with me? Is there reciprocity? But like with my husband, when he and I started courting, we were going back and forth where it would be like he'd pay for a meal, then I would pay for a meal. And we had kind of this back and forth going on. But I do think that one of the things that does give us power when it comes to consensual relationships is having your own purse, having your own wallet,
Mm.
and never being in a situation where you are backed up against a corner where it's like you're feeling obliged to, have sex with somebody or give them sexual favors of some sort or another because you're in a position that you cannot afford.
Mm. Speak those words. Oh my God. Yes. Yes. All right. We're gonna save that message. Y'all better, indulge in that. If you have to go back, please go back. All of that. Yes. Like remove the obligation. Remove the obligation.
Remove the obligation. Yeah.
So never have I ever. We'll do
Never have I
one
ever.
and then we'll
Okay.
close it out. Never have I ever flirted with someone else in front of a significant other.
I'm just trying to think of, I mean, yeah, like who hasn't?
See, that's my yes, I have, but
I mean, who hasn't? I guess what I would say about that is, I mean, I think there's a really big difference between harmless flirting and trying to make somebody jealous. So
hmm.
never have I ever, and I mean that literally, I've never ever flirted with somebody to make another person jealous. Like that, no. But I have certainly been flirtatious and have had lovely, like banter and jokes and fun going on with a significant other in my presence.
Mm,
And I hope everybody's been able to. Like, and I would say if you're in a partnership with somebody who is so insecure that you cannot look at another person or be flattering to another person or dress in, like look luscious around another person and have them like get freaked out by that, then there may be something going on in that relationship that needs some attention.
I agree 100%. Like for me, I do not want or need a partner that polices how sexy I am or
Yeah.
sexy how sexy I can be. Because if I walk out this door, if my intentions is to be sexy enough that I could pull somebody, I'm going to walk out the door sexy enough that I will pull someone. But we're
Oh,
not
hells
going to
yeah.
do anything. Because look, I'm a firm believer that I choose my partner every single day, and I want my partner to also choose me every single day. And at the end of the day, I woke up, I have this person, I want this person. Tomorrow, I want this person, and I know I'm going to want this person on an ongoing basis. No other person is going to like distract me. And even with me being poly, whoever my future partner engage with and add to our relationship is still going to be the same thing. Like you can't steal me from somebody.
Mm-mm, mm-mm. Well, and I've been, we just celebrated our 21st wedding anniversary, and I identify as a pen fidelitous person. I just, for me, it's always the idea of pen fidelity, like multi loyalties, like that has always been really what it's the core is. And yet I've been sexually exclusive with this one person for 20, for more for we met in January of 2000. So I've been in an exclusive relationship for 22 years now, but I do not consider myself monogamous. I consider myself like I repledge myself and recommit to my relationship with this partner on a daily basis. And it is a choice every single day to be like, I do not assume that he or I are by default monogamous with each other simply because that is how it is. It is a deliberate choice on a daily basis. And it is a deliberate choice on a daily basis to keep showing up for the relationship, to be in the relationship. And I think, he and I both choose each other every single day.
Love it. Love it. Whew. On that note, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. You are greatly appreciated, Jennifer. Do you have?
Vernon, it has been such a blast. I just knew you and I were going to have like a really juicy conversation, and I use that word
Right.
deliberately.
Right.
Yeah,
It's been wonderful.
yeah.
I hope the listeners are just as high spirited as I am and as you are,
Hmm.
because it was a rough topic to have a conversation about, but I think it was a needed conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you have any last words that you'd like to share before I close this out?
I guess when it comes to the idea of intoxicated rape culture, um that it's like some shit, like one, if you make a mistake and you end up in a situation where you're compromised and you choose the lesser of evils, please forgive yourself. Like it is what it is, and sometimes it really is like, you acquiesce to sex or you end up on the street at 3 o'clock in the morning, and it's just easier to do the one versus the other. But the other thing is, I guess I would say, if you can possibly check yourself before you wreck yourself, like it is worth having a strategy. It is actually worth having a plan. If you're going to go to a party, how are you going to get home? Like
Mm,
thinking these things through. And, this may be like, no, duh. But like for me, when I was 20 years old, or 21 years, I think I was like 21, when this happened for me, maybe 22, but I wasn't very old. The thing was, I was so naive and young. I really wasn't thinking, and having, sort of being not neurotypical and with a little bit of, ADHD runs in my family. It just didn't even occur to me that I need to think about how I was going to get home. I just was going to go with the flow and find a way. And so I guess I would say is like, if you are going to be in a situation that is unusual for you, if you're going to a party, if you're going to a strange place, if you're going to something that you are not expecting, have checks and balances. friends, have people you're checking in with, maybe have a designated driver or somebody that you're with. Think about your strategies of how are you going to get yourself back to safety? How are you going to take care of yourself? What are you going to do that will, hopefully decrease, like harm reduction, reduce, like decrease your risk of getting into a situation where you are compromised.
Yes, and just to add on to that, just a little bit, like most definitely, if you are in a situation where there's like a bus system that you can use, just knowing when that last stop is, and just having yourself prepared. Like I get that the party is fun, is lit, you're having a good time, but when you know that time is pushing up, you got to leave that party. Give yourself enough time where you can secure your seat. The party is still going to be there. You're still going to be here too. So,
Well, and the challenge, of course, is if you're too intoxicated, you might
mm.
just say fuck it. And
True.
and that's the thing. It's like I remember even at the party that I was talking about where it was like a whole bunch of people were getting ready to leave and I was drunk and I said fuck it. And
Mm,
like because people were like, "Oh, the last subway is leaving," and a whole bunch of people were getting ready to go out the door, and I just was not in my right mind enough to be like, "Oh yeah, I need to do that." So I'm not sure. Like, and then I guess what I would say is if you're finding yourself in a situation where you are drunk in that way and getting into compromising situations, maybe you need to look at your relationship with alcohol.
mm, good point. Good
Yeah.
point. Ooh, now that she's making people self-reflect, Lord. Mm.
Mm-mm-mm.
Think about
Yeah. Yeah, I do that. That is definitely part of what I do.
it. Well, on that note, everyone, thank you all so much for listening to the Holy podcast, where we step out and speak on sexuality. Just in case no one else told you this today, you are beautiful, you are worthy of happiness and joy, you are enough and then some. You may not live up to the expectations of others, but that is okay. You are only required to walk in your own shoes. May each day you live lead you towards abundance. With that said, love you all and see you next episode. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Holiloquy Podcast, where we step out and speak on sexuality. You can subscribe to the podcast through your favorite podcasting app and find us on the web at www.holiloquy.com. That's www.heauxliloquy.com. Share the podcast with your friends and join the conversation.